A Bitcoin ETF has finally started trading. Welcome to CNBC After Hours. I'm Pippa Stevens. Let's get you caught up on the markets. Strong earnings continue to boost stocks, with all three indices ending higher. The Dow gained just over 0.5% and is a little less than 1% from its all-time high. The S&P and Nasdaq, meanwhile, gained closer to 0.75%. And on the crypto front, Bitcoin got a solid boost today. We'll tell you why in just a moment. At the same time, Ethereum rose about 2% by 4 p.m. Eastern, while Dogecoin fell by 4%. Also, here are some other numbers you gotta know. First up is 4.4 million. Netflix reported better than expected earnings this afternoon. The streaming service added about 4.4 million subscribers, which is much better than the 1.5 million it added last quarter. You gotta wonder how much Squid Game helped. Netflix also expects to add 8.5 million subscribers through the rest of 2021. Next, 2000. Last month, Apple's iPhones got a refresh, and now it is the MacBook Pro's turn. Apple updated its popular laptop with beefed-up versions of its in-house chip, named the M1 Pro and M1 Max. The new laptops also bring back ports the previous version of the MacBook killed off, like HDMI and a dedicated charging port. Our video editors are particularly excited about the SD card slot. Now, if you want one of these laptops, it is going to cost you. They start at $2,000 but can go as high as $6,000. Lastly, $35 billion. Speaking of Apple products, the company that builds many of them is expanding into a new industry, electric vehicles. Foxconn unveiled 3 EV prototypes today, part of the company's effort to branch out from consumer electronics. Foxconn hopes its EV business will be worth around $35 billion in 5 years' time. So buying Bitcoin directly wasn't the only way to get in on the coin's rally today. ProShares launched its new Bitcoin futures ETF under the ticker BITO, and it popped more than 4.8% on its first day of trading. Now, it's not like investing in Bitcoin directly, but rather on contracts that speculate on the future price of Bitcoin. It's not quite the fun that some crypto fans were hoping for, such as one that tracked physical Bitcoin, but it does provide a new way to invest in the industry. CNBC's Tanea McKeel is going to walk us through how this new form of investment works.
Today we got the first Bitcoin ETF. This is something the crypto industry has wanted for a very long time. It's good to note front and center that this ETF actually tracks cash-settled CME Bitcoin futures. So that means futures contracts that speculate on the future price of Bitcoin rather than tracking Bitcoin itself. It's not ideal for existing crypto investors, but symbolically, it is a huge deal. We have seen from regulators that they're sort of done trying to kill crypto. So even though a futures ETF is not really what existing Bitcoiners wanted, it's a huge step forward in terms of crypto regulation. And a lot of people are hoping that this is going to open the door for a spot Bitcoin ETF to be approved at some point down the line. The crypto industry has just changed so much in the last few years since the 2017-2018 period, where you saw a bunch of asset managers start to file their applications to the SEC for a spot Bitcoin ETF, and one by one they all got rejected because at the time the SEC's sort of gripe was that these asset managers were unable to prove that the market could be resistant to manipulation. Bitwise, the asset manager, who also has an application in line for a futures-based Bitcoin ETF, has submitted hundreds of pages of research to the SEC, basically saying that the Bitcoin market has now matured to the point where Bitcoin futures are the leading source of price discovery, which effectively satisfies the SEC's hurdle for the potential approval of an ETF. There are many in the crypto space who have said that this is basically going to be kind of a non-event. We've seen the price of Bitcoin climb pretty steadily for almost a month now. And for the second half of that, I think a lot of that was driven by this positive anticipation about what would happen and if this futures ETF would go through. You also have others who don't see this as a top and see this as a fairly positive development that is going to send Bitcoin climbing to its next all-time high. I think it's one or the other. I think it's either a non-event or it's going to go up. I don't know how this would send the price of Bitcoin downward, and I haven't heard much from sources who have said that they see that happening.
All right, before we go, here's one last thing to know. The SEC has finally released its report on the GameStop frenzy from earlier this year. In its 44-page report, the SEC said payment for order flow encourages brokers to treat trading like a game in order to lure in investors. The agency didn't blame a single business or cause, however. Chair Gary Gensler came on CNBC today and said the agency is working to determine whether payment for order flow needs to be regulated. You can read about Gensler's comments along with everything else we talked about today by going to CNBC.com or downloading the CNBC app. That's all for today's edition of After Hours, but we'll be back here every Tuesday and Thursday, and we'll see you then.